Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this another exciting session on Pakistani Anglophone fiction. The title of our session is Who Owns the English Language? Contemporary Pakistani Anglophone fiction. So we've been joined by three excellent, scholars here and writers. We have with us Amber Khairi, who is an author and columnist. She worked at the BBC World Service in London for 17 years as a news producer and radio broadcaster for the BBC Urdu service. Her column, UK Calling, has appeared in the news on Sunday for more than 2 decades, and her writing has been published in the UK in the Literary Review, the Telegraph, and the Guardian, and in Canada in the Toronto Review. She's a graduate of Princeton University. Her first novel, Akbar in Wonderland, is set in Karachi in 1990s and is about a naive journalist who gets caught up in a web of media manipulation and repression. Our second speaker is Razia Sajid. Razia is an award-winning writer currently based in Islamabad, where she writes and teaches ESL and writing. Razia's first novel, Biryani and Tati, was released in 2024. Razia's short stories have been placed in prestigious contests such as Times of Oman's nationwide literary contest in 2013. She was longlisted for the ZHR Writing Prize in 2023 and was runner-up of the Salam Award this year, and got the Great Novelist Chapter 1 prize as well. In addition, her work has appeared in Dawn's Young World, Writing Kid, On the Premises, and Chapter and Verse. Our third panelist is Dr. Sonia Aram, who is an assistant professor in the Department of English at International Islamic University, Islamabad. Sonia earned her PhD from Royal Holloway University of London and specializes in literature and environment. She has been the coordinator of the Critical Thinking Forum and editor of Gentle Visitations, an online literary magazine. So thank you so much for joining me today. When we situate Pakistani literature within the global context, our Anglophone writings have greater visibility as compared to the works which are written in indigenous languages. And there is no doubt about the fact that Pakistani writers of Anglophone literature, they have been successful in creating unique voice and form, which is not subsumed by the hegemonic forms which are coming from Euro-American literary, cultural, and theoretical traditions. Nevertheless, our writers, despite this singularity and distinctiveness of their work and genre conventions, have been extremely mindful of a sense of global responsibility, which has actually resulted in initiating the debates across the linguistic, cultural, and thematic domains. Because many of our problems are of global nature and which needs to be addressed in a global fashion. And I think English language has morphed into a lingua franca where we are experimenting with different forms, and that is why our writers choose to write in English in order to reach to the broader readership. But I think the problem, or this very question, who owns the English language, it all of a sudden emerges, onto the screen or onto the literary landscape when we consider the global visibility of Anglophone literature vis-a-vis the ones that are written in indigenous languages. And then all of a sudden, Pakistani audience, they start to ask, why to write in English? And then, we hear so much about, this literary elitism of the Anglophone writers and all that kind of stuff. So, my question, to, of course, first of all, to Amber and to Razia is, I know that, Kamila Shamsi has once said that even the most engaged reader in Pakistan would be hard-pressed to name more than a dozen authors who are writing in English. So what specific challenges does a writer face when he or she chooses to write in English, and particularly when you are catering both the local and international readership. And another very important thing, that do you envision your primary audience as the local readers or the internet, or as creative writers, as we know, this doesn't matter to you at all? So yes, Amber.
Well, first of all, the point of the readership and not knowing, this is, I think, Kamla Shamsi's remark about most people would not know. I think the turnout at your last session was amazing, and there was so much interest in the whole issue of English language and English language, local things written in English language. I think that might have changed a little bit. Also, this literature festival, I'm seeing so many more books by local authors.
Yeah.
Like surprising. I mean, I cannot keep up with those. So I think that's heartening, and that might be changing. As far as choosing to write in English, I think a lot of writers who are writing in English are not choosing to write in English. That's the language they can express themselves the best in.
Yeah.
You know, if they could write in Urdu, perhaps they would write in Urdu. But that is what they find it easiest to express themselves in. Yes, the readership is then limited, but that's how they can tell their stories. As far as the process goes and the writing goes, one of the things I found very difficult when I was doing this book was having to italicize Urdu and Urdu words.
Yeah.
I hate that. And so I ended up deciding not to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was able to do that, but I found that very annoying. And then, of course, when you're writing for a global audience, then you think, oh, I need to explain what is a takhat and what is this and what is a gautak. At some point I said, I'm not going to do that. Yeah. You know, the people who are going to understand this story are here more than anything else. Yeah. And now I think it's changing. You have a lot of international books in which people just Google stuff and they figure out what things are. So I think that was the most, once I made that decision, I think it was easier for me to get on with the story. So I don't know how that works for other people though.
Yes, Razia.
Not italicizing definitely is, I feel it's, how do you say, it's a way of asserting ourselves as local English writers, like I'm writing in English, but I'm not going over to the other side. You mentioned challenges that Pakistani writers have when they're writing in English, and there's a lot of them. There's internal challenges and there's external ones. You mentioned one or two of the external ones, but internally, I don't know about others, but for me, it's always a struggle. The feeling that maybe I'm, the thing you said about elitism.
Yeah, literary elitism, yes.
And that affects the way that I write, but like Amber said, for me, it wasn't a choice, just like she said. Mm-hmm. And English is the language I could express myself best in. So, I mean, I intend to correct that, if correct is the right word, by getting into making my Urdu better, by knowing and hopefully one day writing in regional languages. It's a dream, but it's one that, is an important one.
Yeah, because this is why I actually mentioned this idea of linguistic elitism, because when it comes to the question of linguistic ownership, like who owns the English language, so the kind of a more pluralistic kind of, or pluricentric views of English and the ways in which English has morphed into, lingua franca, because English has emerged as a medium of cross-cultural exchange, as I said, that, because we have to cater to what is happening globally as well. So, and this shift has not only broadened the scope of the writing, like, the English itself, English as a language, but I think it has also opened up the possibilities of storytelling and the story making as well. So, to what extent do you think that your own fictional narratives or your own creative practices, they are shaping and reshaping and redefining English language itself to express uniquely Pakistani experience, or again, going back to that term, which I love to use here, Pakistani idiom?
Sorry, what is
like, how does your own creative practicing, they are kind of pushing the boundaries of English and, they're redefining the language in order to express more Pakistani idiom or experiences?
Idioms. Absolutely. When I started writing, I felt like I had to stick to a certain way of writing English, which had to be intelligible to the global audience. But as I read more widely, I realized that other people weren't doing this. And by others, I mean, let's say, Scottish, Australian, Irish writers who had their own languages, their regional languages, other than English.
Yeah.
So I thought, why should we? And it started with not italicizing our Urdu words, and then also idioms and expressions that might not be intelligible to our writers, and just being okay with that, just accepting that this is a thing that they might have to research a little bit and still might not understand, but it leaves a topic for discussion, for curiosity. I like that element of mystery.
So
there.
you don't prefer to sort of give a list of glossary or to the end of your work.
That's
You
not
don't
me,
do
yeah.
that. And so is the case with you, Amber, right?
Yeah, I thought about the glossary, but I thought about it at the point when I was still thinking about the italics. And when I dispense with the italics, then I dispense with the glossary.
Glossary as
because
well.
then, I'm writing for people who will understand it anyway. So, it sort of went
So
that.
what about the experiment with the language itself? Like, how do you
I think
how do you
it's,
play with the language itself in order to give another shape?
So with me, it was more telling the story, and then it was just voices of people and the way they talk. But if you talk about, like, I think Pakistani writers in English, I think Moni Mohsen, for example, the way she conveys dialogue
Yes.
and rhythms and, cultural things, I think that's very clever and very effective.
Absolutely.
So I think she really is managing to kind of bring that idiom and that kind of rhythm and things into her work, I would say. And
Speaking of idioms, sometimes I do this thing where I will, just to give an example, and this is not an example from Urdu, in my book I've got a Pakistani character and an Irani character, right? So
Yeah.
Iran is also a part of me, of the book, of my writing. So in Farsi, when you say you miss someone, the Farsi expression translates to your place here is empty. And sometimes instead of saying I miss you, I make my characters say your place here is empty. And it conveys the general sentiment. Anyone who knows a little bit about this expression knows where it's coming from, but it's also intelligible to the others. So I try to take that middle path that introduces people to new idioms, perhaps in English, but reminding them of the idiom that it came from, even if it sounds awkward in English, let's say.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Sonia, my next question is for you. You know that there is an increasingly decolonizing, turn in humanities. Now, as a literary scholar, do you feel a responsibility to sort of decolonize English literature in your writing and teaching practices? And if so, how?
Thank you very much for asking these questions. I so wanted to answer this one. Yes, I agree with this turn to decolonization of the language. I think because we hold a very critical position, just being belonging to a country which is actually a post-colonial country, so we have a responsibility to decolonize the subject, which itself is a cultural hegemony because it was brought to us by the colonizers. And we need to think beyond the Eurocentric framework. As an academician, I think, and as a researcher, I think we have a responsibility for that. And I think when you talk about the English departments or English literature in specific, yes, because our cultural, linguistic, academic landscape needs to be decolonized. And for that, if as a teacher, if you ask me that what practical approaches we can take to decolonize that in our teaching and in our writing, is that I think first we need to reevaluate the canons. We need to bring our own texts into the canonization process. I think that will actually invite the integration of our local texts into that. And as these two guests were mentioning, that they don't need the field to bring glossary when they are writing into English. It's not, when I was also translating one of the works and I was asked to give a glossary of certain words, and it's not that it's not a good idea to give that, but the point is that I prefer not to give that because I wanted the readers to understand and learn the language as we learn the other language. Given that English is an international language, it's the language that we speak, but that does not mean that we do not bring the texts which have been marginalized by the Western standards. So we should not discard the Western texts, but what we can do is that we can make our students to see those classic Western texts and compare them with our own, right? We are doing that in our different courses, but we need to do that more. And we need to give them a lens where they can evaluate the colonial ideologies that were in those classical texts which we admired. That's there, but we need to bring more of our own texts, whether in translation
Yeah.
or in other texts, I think. So there are a lot of practical approaches to that, and that will actually make our literary landscape more diverse when we bring that.
And I think as academics and literary scholars, particularly who are working in a university, we had this chance to sort of decolonize the curriculum as well.
Yes.
So I think gradually, I mean, I won't say that, we don't teach English or American or Canadian or any other or Arab literature, but it's just that I think our literature is more kind of, eccentric. We're introducing more specialized courses based on like South Asian studies or post-colonial studies and world literatures and Pakistani Anglophone writing or Indian writings and that kind of stuff.
Yes,
so that's
yes.
kind of a way,
Yeah.
a first step towards kind of,
Yes, our departments
decolonizing
were
it.
actually dominated by the syllabi from American and British studies. But
Yeah.
I think we have started this effort that we bring our own
Absolutely.
Anglophone literature
Yeah.
there, but we need to do that more.
And I think our MPhil and PhD scholars are getting kind of more interested in working on their own authors as compared to sort of, working on American, Canadian, or English authors. Okay, Razia, one question to you, because when I was just browsing your website, I just found out that, you work with different art forms. And interestingly, there is this, as I said to Sonia as well, that there's this turn towards this turn towards digital humanities as well, which has immensely transformed the ways in which literature is produced and the literature is consumed. So how this digital turn has actually transformed your writing, or I would really be interested to know how about your experimentation with the linguistic and art forms and other creative practices.
I'm personally very interested in experimenting with different art forms. I was, even before I started writing formally.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example to answer your question. When in the first stages of my first novel, Biryani and Tachin, when I gave it to a friend to beta read, give me feedback, he doodled illustrations in the corners. And some of them were, like you would think that it would just illustrate the story, but it did more than that. And I would be really interested in having an illustrated version out of the book that actually adds to the story. So it conveys more than just visual equality.
Yeah.
It adds to the story, it tells you the story, and I love the idea of graphic novels, of these multidisciplinary forms of fiction.
Yeah.
I definitely think that we're past the time when we should really start. I am very enthusiastic about adding art forms to literature and fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. We have wonderful kind of, graphic novels coming up, and, especially the people are getting interested in children's literature as well, that has these art forms as well, so just to play with. So, Amber, do you sort of experiment with your writing as well? And particularly, because your journalistic kind of an experience, how does this add to your creative practices?
How does it add to?
To your creative practices. Or to your fiction writing?
I think unfortunately, I'm very 20th century. I'm from the 20th century, so I'm still catching up with a lot of things. But I'm thinking that maybe in the future we will, less than the published novel, perhaps the new form would be some kind of serialization digitally, and you go back a little bit to Victorian times where you had, books serialized and then they became books. So maybe that's going to happen. But I personally have a very old-fashioned approach to it. And at the moment, what you need to do is you use the digital and the social media basically to promote at the moment. So I'm just stuck in the old-fashioned one at the moment. But if I can go back to the point you made about decolonizing English, and you are both in academia. So I was wondering, is it decolonizing English, or is it a kind of a devolution, or I think what you would call provincializing? What would it be? Okay. In our case.
Okay, Sonia, would you like to
sorry,
say
what
first?
word did you use?
And then
I said, would it be devolution rather than a decolonization?
No, I wouldn't say that would be a devolution because we are evolving in that language. So I won't say it's a devolution of that or a devolution of that language. It's a decolon because I said that because the English subject arrived in the subcontinent as a cultural hegemony item here to us, and I think what we need to, we're not discarding that. It is important. We need to study that. But with that, we need to just free it from that colonial, it's very deeply entrenched with that colonial ideal. So we just need to remove that from it. So that's why we are just saying it decolonize. But we can think of your perspective also.
Yeah, no, I just thought, because you talk about provincialization, so it seemed to me provincialization was a bit closer to devolution, but I suppose decolonization is purifying it a bit. Or
purifying from the colonial traces, yeah.
From that, and I think what we're trying to do, particularly through our work, is that we're kind of, decenter the theoretical, paradigms. So when, for example, when I write or when I'm sort of writing, coming up with my monograph, so what I do is that I tend to sort of trace more indigenous models of I align myself more with, let's say, the Muslim or the Islamic traditions or the South Asian traditions, as say, instead of borrowing more and more from the Western theorists or literary scholars. So it's all about kind of, digging our own roots and claiming our own roots, and just, because we have our own issues, we have our own problems to talk about. And I don't think that, drawing upon just the West-centric kind of theoretical models would actually, generate any debates. So the entire idea of decoloniality is just, going back to our own roots and decenter the European and the American debates in literature, of course. Okay, Amber, again, coming back to the same point of linguistic elitism, which is predominantly, I think, this is a charge directed against the Anglophone writers and not the writers who are writing in indigenous languages. And this is exactly something which Tariq Rahman also pointed out in his book. So do you believe that writing in English inherently prioritizes one audience over another, or is this a kind of misconception of or about Pakistani literature in English?
No, of course. I mean, if you're writing in English, you're writing for an elite group of people who read English. So you are automatically prioritizing. But I don't think that should stop writers from writing in English, because if, there's a whole process of translation, and then the story becomes accessible to others. But I mean, if that's the language you can express yourself in, that's what you like. And a lot of times yes, you can think carefully about who you want to reach, and then maybe if it's a very specific directed thing, which would be some kind of propaganda or some story which you think should reach, you will make the effort to write in a different language. But otherwise, I think you'll write in the language that you feel you can express yourself best in. And I don't think it becomes limited, because if you look at Abdullah Hussain and his Udas Naslein, I mean, it was in Urdu, and it was, did very well, and a very, it's a landmark kind of a publication in Urdu. But many years later, in England, he did the English translation himself, and it was then accessible in English as the Wary generation. So I think translation can play an important part. But yes, of course, I mean, English, we have an elite language of English, and but at the same time, maybe if there are more books in English by local authors, they will reach more people who want to read more in English and write more in English. So that is something that could happen or could be a positive effect. And I mean, the whole thing about English being an elite thing and a colonial thing, it is, but at the same time, it's an advantage that we in the subcontinent have. And I think sometimes Pakistanis overall don't take as much advantage of it as, say, Indians do. In the international markets.
To be very honest, like as academics, this question is absolutely relevant for example, for me as a literary scholar or as a teacher of literature, because we are teaching literatures which are coming from different parts of the world, and for us it's an interesting way of engaging in this cross-cultural dialogue, and it's all about sort of situating ourselves vis-a-vis what people globally are doing. Or you can say it's all about sort of, situating our own writers, onto the global literary landscape. So how would you do that, unless, or even, for example, we always say that one of the decolonial kind of, turn is also that, in order to make our indigenous writer in dialogue with what is happening, or connect them with the writings at the global level, the best thing that we can do is to get these works translated, get our very, there's amazing kind of, body of the work available here, but people are not familiar with that. So getting it translated and then, just introducing it to the international reader is something really very important that we really need to start thinking about more seriously. Yes, Razia, what is your opinion about that?
Agreeing with both of you about opening dialogues, taking advantage, that's a very good point, of the English language. I would say, at the risk of oversimplifying it, English is absolutely elitist, especially here, especially in our society. I do not fight that charge.
Yes.
I accept it. It is elitist. I think this is more relevant to my other line of work as an ESL teacher.
Yeah.
So when I teach students English, I often feel compelled to remind them that it's just a language. It's just a language.
Just a language, yes, exactly.
It's a language that's going to open doors and a lot of other things, but it is just a language. And sometimes I feel, as someone who's one of my first two languages is English, as someone who writes only in English, there is definitely a conflict there. And I accept that charge wholeheartedly, that English is elitist, and perhaps that makes me elitist as an Anglophone writer.
Yeah, I think
I
it's
understand the
high
other
time.
side of it.
Yes, it's high time that we really need to stop thinking about this thing that it's a language of elitism, or even it's a colonial legacy or all that. So because it has morphed into a language. It's a global language where you connect with the broader readers, the broader audience. Okay, Sonia, just extending this question again. Ijaz Ahmed has actually critiqued the privileged post-colonial writers, who engage with Western audiences at the expense of the local ones. Now, since your research is predominantly in the field of Pakistani Anglophone literature, do you think that your students and the readers are still obsessed with writers' choice to write in English? Because again, we are referring to this title, Who Owns the... Is this an important question? Do we really need to talk about it? I know that, the question pops up only with reference to Pakistani audience when we start comparing, again, as I said, Anglophone literature vis-a-vis the more indigenous language. So do you think that this charge of elitism is fading away with this global recognition of Pakistani writing now?
Yes, there is no denying the fact that, yes, the English language here in our society, as Razia was saying, there is an elitism in that. But I think it is evolving, and yes, in the past there has been a long-standing tension between writers' choice of writing in English for the Western audience. But I think with the passage of time, it's evolving in our country, because now since it's a global language, and people who are writing in English does not only have subjects which are only for the international audience, because when they are talking about migration, identity issues, environment or social issues in Pakistan, so they're actually addressing the Pakistani society also. So I think when they're writing, yes, again I say we cannot, it's the skepticism is still there about this English language being elite, yes it is, and then especially when it's in literature, so it is a degree higher. But I think the audience would agree with me that अंग्रेज़ी ज़बान हम सब लोग शायद उतने अच्छे तरीके से बोल नहीं सकते, पर हम समझते हैं. बहुत सारे लोग ये समझते हैं, and I think it's not that when we are writing in English or when we are producing text in English, or the writers, the Anglophone writers, when they're writing the fiction in English, it's not that it's always the Western audience that they have to cater to or they have to serve, and they want to be internationally recognized. It's the language, it's the medium that they're using, which will be global. And in Pakistani society, we need to come out of this complex also that we don't understand English language. We do understand English language. We understand very well. It's just the culture that we have to promote, that the writers that are writing, they're writing for us also, and we need to, I think, when the new writers, they're coming, they're producing, and we have our own, as you say, Pakistani idiom, so we have our own language, and we compare the text, the Western text and your Pakistani text, and you'll see that you're creating your own English language, and which is very important, and which is a very fresh start, which is a very fresh wave in our country, that people have actually starting to communicate and to read and to respond to the language which is global.
Okay, do you think that this charge of elitism is held against, or these kind of charges of using the language of the colonial period and all that is held at the local writers as well? Writers means the people who are writing in indigenous languages.
But what I think is that people need to come out of this, readers need to come out of it, because those who are writing in their own indigenous language or in the national or local or native language, it's not necessarily that they want to, they want, you can say, rebuttal people who are writing in English, or they want to have a contrast the people who are writing in English. It's just the medium, it's just the language. We're using language as a medium. We're just not creating any kind of superiority with using the language. So if the English writers are writing in English, Pakistani English writers, absolutely wonderful. Local translations are coming, absolutely wonderful, because when the translations are coming of these English texts, it means that you're integrating that English language and your local language together, and you're actually broadening the canvas of your literary writings that would reach to the broader audience.
Yeah.
So I think people need to come out of this, that it is an elitist language. It is, but just come out of this.
Yeah. Yes, Amber.
Sorry, can I just make a point that translation is wonderful, but sometimes translation will get you into trouble, because what you can get away with here, writing in English, you often won't when it goes to Urdu, and you have an example of that when Muhammad Hanif's Case of Exploding Mangoes was translated, and Maktaba Danial did it.
That's really important.
It was all midnight raids and confiscated copies. So translation can be a dangerous business as well sometimes, yeah.
Very good example. Okay, Amber and Razia, I would like you to just very quickly comment on, and tell us a little bit about your work, the novels that you've just written, because both have actually come out in 2024. So again, you're using English as a medium of expression and nothing else, but what are your stories? Who these stories are for? So yes, okay, Amber first.
Okay, so my story, which is this book, so I can show it around, but anyway, it's set in the 1990s, and it centers around a journalist who, is living through a decade of quite a lot of political change in Pakistan. This is kind of a post 11 years of martial law, and you have a new civilian government in, and it feels like the press is free and everything's going back towards democracy and things like this. So it's about him getting caught up in events in which he thinks, these stories, where are they coming from? What's going on in the country? And so it's a little bit about this bubble that we tend to live in which you don't realize what are the realities of a very difficult world and a difficult country around you. And then when those kind of impinge on your comfortable realities, you realize, I don't know what's going on. So that's why it's called Akbar in Wonderland, because it refers to the Alice in Wonderland, the kind of surreal things that are suddenly happening. So that is the story of this journalist who's suddenly thrown into this. But what I've written about, a lot of the things are, you'll find it's a pattern or a script that you can see in recent events in the country as well. There's the same kind of pattern that's going on. But anyway, hopefully it's not too didactic. It's just the story of this chap.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Razia.
So this is my book. It's called Biryani and Tahcheen, not a cookbook. It's a novel. I feel compelled to add that. It's a story of a girl called Mariam from Karachi, and she goes to live in Tehran, in Iran. I spent a few years in Iran, and there were a lot of surprising things there that were surprising for me, and I wanted to come back and share that surprise with other people. So I'm hoping that's what I've done in this book. It's a light read, although the thing I'm about to say next might contradict that, because her husband does die in the first chapter. not a spoiler. It's the event that triggers off the rest of the story. So now you've got a Pakistani girl whose identity was supposed to be tied to a man, suddenly without a man, whose identity was supposed to be tied to her country, suddenly without her country. So now this woman who is, she's a woman in her own right, she's got an identity, how is she gonna face the rest of the world, the rest of her life? So
It's going to negotiate her subjectivity.
yeah, and at the same time, it's also, I mean, it's tragic, but also it's a second chance. So that I enjoyed playing with both of those angles of that, and then I hope my readers will also.
Good, thank you. I have had a lot of requests in the last session that the audience really wanted to ask so many questions and they didn't get a chance. So I just thought that I'll stop here. See, okay. And so there are so many questions yes, people want to ask. So I'm going to stop here and, we are going to take questions from the audience. Okay, so okay, yes. And again, I would request, please keep your questions very quick so that we can take maximum
Okay,
questions.
direct coming to the question. After having listened so many talk shows and having discussed so many things, I being a student of literature, the perplexity is still there. Whether we should follow English or like in Gugi Vathiango, we should completely detach from it. And then Chinvezu even goes a step further, specifying decolonizing the African mind. Whether we should decolonize Pakistani mind or we should write as more as we can in English. So how do you think that this perplexity can be solved? Thank you so much.
Okay, what should we do? The question is still there. Whether or not to write in English, shall we write more and more in English, or we should just, use our own indigenous languages?
Well, I think people who can write and express themselves in English will write in English, and people who can write and express themselves in Urdu will write in Urdu or in other regional languages. So I don't think we need to have a very hard and fast categorization.
Yeah. We're not stopping anyone from to write from writing in their own indigenous languages. There's a plenty of literature that is being produced in Urdu as well, in other regional languages, Hindi, Balochi, Pashto, whatever it is. So I think it's all about writers' own choices, where they feel comfortable. Some people feel comfortable writing in English, some people feel more comfortable writing in Urdu. Some people are very happy, like, as we were just talking about, Waqas Khaja's poetry, that's very bilingual, so they're experimenting with the forms and they're blending in, more and more, words from other languages as well, whether Arabic or Persian or, Urdu. Yes, okay, here and...
Thank you so much. I think your discussion about language elitism, and its colonial legacy as well as efforts to decolonization has been very interesting as well as intriguing. I would contend and say that language is not a system of expression or a medium of communication. Rather, it's a system of thought which is deeply rooted in history as well as culture of a particular society. And when you say that while incorporating Urdu or other indigenous languages words or icons into a particular fiction or an essay that you are trying to decolonize, I think the very idea or effort, what you call decolonization, is in fact colonization of the word and the language. Because it's devoid of its own culture and a system of thought and a particular events that happen in that particular society, when you say that you are decolonizing, actually you are trying to colonize the very words. It's the language which has become a barrier between our indigenous languages, mother languages, then Urdu language, and then English language, which has thwarted, thinking as well as creativity in this country. I think I would like to have your take on it or your thoughts on it.
Okay.
I think that's a really interesting point, actually, because what you're saying is it's what people in the West like to now, young people used to say this is cultural appropriation and you're stealing somebody's culture and references and making it your own. So I think your point about the reverse thing happening or the decolonizing is that language is taking bits of another culture. But I think, I mean, we like to think that it's, we're re-owning it and we're making it our own.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting point, a very good point, I think.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Hi, I'm Meenu. I teach English at a government college. My question is to the panel. Due to our colonial history, English language as a medium of expression is constantly questioned by the public, and rightfully so. Do you think, as writers and researchers, do you feel boxed in this stereotype? If yes, how do you practically counter this pressure?
Okay, I think.
You asked if we feel boxed by this stereotype. I've never thought of it that way because I agree with the stereotype. I mean, I agree where it's coming from. I know where it's coming from, and I never felt like I was the one being marginalized and oppressed in this case. It's an issue, like the gentleman at the back said, English is a means of power. It was, it is. I don't disagree. So that's me, yeah. I've never thought of it as being boxed in myself. I mean, there are people being boxed in this scenario of people writing, Pakistani writers writing in English, but I am not, as a writer writing in English, I don't think I have the first right to be the one saying I'm boxed in this stereotype.
Okay, yes, Sonia, you wanted to say something?
No, I don't think that with the present scenario we feel any kind of pressure like that, because what I observe is that, because since I'm engaged with a younger audience as students, I think the younger audience are less obsessed with the language. They're more interested in what is the idea of representation, how the themes are being represented. And they're equally conscious of valuing their own bilingual, multilingual text with these Western texts. So the idea is that they're embracing now that with these Western texts, we are happy to study and read our own non-Western or indigenous texts as well. Yeah, it's changing.
Sorry, there was a second part to her question that I'd just like to answer super quickly. She said, how do you practically deal with the pressure? And the answer is, I think, by keeping an open mind, by listening to the people who disagree with me.
Okay, yes.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. Ma'am, I have a question that I have seen here, that we have extremist attitude towards the languages. On the one hand, we talk about decolonizing. On the other hand, people are talking about that language is a tool of colonization. That why we can't adopt a post-human approach, that the things are the languages, they should coexist. For I believe in that language is a tool of propaganda, or it is a tool to inculcate some ideology, but it depends on what we are reading. If the writer, if it is inculcating some Eastern ideology in his text through English language, then it is not bad, I think. Thank you.
Where did you get this idea from that we're following the extremes? I think we, throughout our discussion here and in the previous section as well, we said we are interested in cross-cultural dialogue.
Definitely.
We're interested in cross-cultural dialogue.
But by hearing the questions.
Okay, yeah. All right. So yes, who would like to sort of, respond to the question? Yes.
I think the question...
It was, we've already answered, in fact, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, cultural dialogue is what you need, translation is what you need.
Yeah.
And I suppose you're not going to talk about the purity of the English language when you're writing in Pakistan, so it's obviously a hybrid
and what do we really mean by that?
Form.
Like, we don't talk about like British English or any standard English. Now we have come into the times where we're actually talking about Englishes. There is an Indian English, there is an Arab English, there is a Pakistani English, and you do have now the dictionaries of all these different versions and kinds of Englishes as well. Yes, Beta, you have a question?
Sorry, can I just say, Urusa, when I, talking about Pakistani English, when I was looking at your questions and points for the discussion, I looked up Pakistani English, and there was this horrible word, which is Pinglish.
Pinglish.
Which some people are using to discuss, and I think we should resist that as much as possible.
Yeah, of course not. Not to just succumb to any derogatory.
Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. I'm a student of BS English, and I'm also an aspiring writer. And I just wanted to know that how does one come to terms with the fact that the rhythm in your mother tongue or in Urdu that you will never be able to replicate in English, because I always remember this one word, hasrat, and unfulfilled desire just does not hit the way hasrat does. And though I get it that you can, italicize that word and it might, have others try to search it up. But still, for example, Danial Muhyiddin in the book, In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, he starts with the Punjabi proverb. And as a Punjabi speaker, I could not know, because I had the version which there was only an English translation, that this was a Punjabi proverb. So how does one come to term with the fact that it's just never going to be that good?
Okay, did you face this problem that yes, there are certain things that are untranslatable, like you just can't translate it from one culture to the other, because you've had an experience of living in the Middle East as well, or in Iran. So how do you deal with this dilemma of untranslatability of certain ideas or concepts?
You asked how do you, what was the word you used when you said how do you... No, not hasrat. How do you come to terms with
Hasrat.
it? And yeah, hasrat.
Yeah.
So I feel like when I heard you say that, the first thing that came to my mind was you don't try to equalize the two or translate it at all. Use the word hasrat in your English book. Do it. I've done it. A lot of people have done it.
Yeah,
you see,
I
Moni
think-
Mohsin sometimes writes in a way that's not intelligible to me as
Yeah.
either an English reader or a Pakistani Urdu speaker, but I'm still reading it. Everyone's still reading it. It's an amazing mixture, mishmash of the Urdu language. And she uses Urdu lines, like lines upon lines sometimes.
This kind of
and she's an
bilingualism
amazing
is
writer.
very common now in many writings, in Arab writings or other.
And I think the point is that you don't have to actually come to terms with all these difficulties, because there's no denying the fact that, yes, translation is a dangerous process. It loses the impact that the original language has, but that does not stop you from writing in another medium. So just keep writing whatever comes to your mind, and at least bring your writing to the world, to the audience.
Okay, yes, we have two
Sorry,
questions from this. Oh, right,
Well,
yes.
first, I just want to say I'm really glad to hear you're an aspiring writer, and I hope you don't get discouraged and demoralized along the way. But it's true, there are a lot of things in Urdu, for example, concepts and emotions that are very, very difficult to translate. And as these two said, you just have to find your own way to do it.
And interestingly, I mean, these words, they're becoming part of the dictionaries as well. Pajamas, and hijab and all that kind of stuff. They're just part of the dictionary now. Okay, yes.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. Ishfaq Wazir. First of all, I would like to show my pleasure that I am sitting beside Sir Zahid Hussain Sahib, who is mentor, and I really like him for his articles. Now, coming back to the questions, I have a question that is there different standards of generalism when it comes to the languages? Like generalism in English is different, either in Urdu is different, in Punjabi that might be different. What's your stance on that? If yes, is it because the society or the ownership of the language, the respective language?
Sorry, I didn't get your question. Can you just repeat your question?
Is there different standards of generalism when it comes to language? If yes, is it because the ownership of the language or the society in which
Journalism.
yeah?
Okay, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's an interesting question. I think it's a lot to do with the economics of it, because who is your readership and how much do you want to sell? So English has a limited readership, and the language is often very good. Urdu will be more accessible and sometimes more sensational. The standards will be different. It will reach more people. Something like you see which is happening in television as well. People are shouting and you're getting ads, but you're getting ads. So.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. I am Fayaz Faloj and I write articles to English newspaper. I would like to share my personal experience, and I think it should be developed as a strategy to develop the feelings of fantasy with English language. Based on my experience, I found English language to be largely accommodative, inclusive, and it promotes diversity. And when we start to explore diverse stories relating to the areas that are mostly neglected, such as Balochistan, Hunza, Gilgit-Baltistan, and so many areas, it will bring out potentially positive results by developing the feelings of interest among the people by knowing about the undiscovered stories. And I have found that there is a diverse religious diversity, cultural diversity, linguistic diversity, and in this way, we will be able to counter the fundamentalist approach that is usually developed with English language. Thank you.
Okay, would you like to respond to that? That was just a comment. But, well, just to add to you, like, there are quite a lot of writers who are actually writing about these regions, and there's stories like, Jamil Ahmed, the Fatma Bhutto. So there are, Muhammad Hanif. So these are the writers who are actually writing from that particular part of the world as well. Like, they're picking up stories from there as well. So it's just that we need to just expose ourselves more and more to what our writers are writing.
Yeah, definitely. We understand that there are certain restrictions.
Yeah.
But the point is the stories that are mostly neglected. I don't like to say, but there are certain stories such as missing person and so many issues that the people face there.
Oh,
so
yes.
these are the stories. These needs to be internationalized so that there could be some positive developments. People also develop, and the international world will understand about the stories behind the people live there. Thank you.
Yeah. But again, as Zaina said, that these are the stories that are being written, and because they're written in English, so they're disseminated to the wider audience and the readers as well.
And I would just like to make one comment about this discussion is that, we constantly keep discussing of the elitism of this English language. The point is that we need to be clear of is that when you go outside and you see the different signboards, there's always written in Urdu beef shop, right? And vegetable store, right? It's all English words, but they're written in Urdu. So it's not that we don't understand that language. It's like, it has become a common language. Social media languages there. Our kids are learning that language. They're so comfortable in using that language. It's just because it's English literature. And literature itself is the highest form of art, so that's why perhaps we think that, and we connect it with that elitism, because no matter it is, because literature is obviously it's a different form of language from the ordinary language, so perhaps it's that which also, for a common audience or masses, it's this point in their mind that they think it's a very elitist kind of culture that we experience. So I think we need to have more voices. If you can write in English, for example, when our new writers or when they're writing in English, it's not our first language, it's not our second language, and most of us, for most of us, it's our third language, and still we are writing in that, we are creating an expression in that. So I think this makes us that the Anglophone writing does not stand alone. So we have our own idioms, we have our own languages, we have our own native writings coming, which actually makes that Anglophone writing complement and coexist with our local narratives that we are producing. So I think as long as you understand English language, so just keep producing that work.
Okay. Yes. Can we have a mic for that lady over there?
Thank you. I have a question for Ma'am Sonia that, yes, okay, I'm okay with the Anglophonic writing because, again, it's creating identity and image of the Pakistani literature, and Pakistan is living here, but I have an issue with narrative. Like, don't you think the timeline of the literature that we see over the period of years, like particularly after 9/11, it's more global rather than being very original. We are more turned towards global ideas of identity crises and across the borders, and then the second generational traumas, rather than having those experience of very original, the person who never traveled, never exposed, their representation in English. Although I don't have an issue with language, but I'm still concerned about the narratives that we need to present in Anglophonic writing. They must be very original and very, very indigenous rather than what do you find the reason? Whether the answer is again language, the cultural experience of the language, or do you find that the experience of those writers who are producing these writings, like those writers are elitist in their approach? Thank you.
No, the concern that you have is that because when Anglophone writing was becoming popular in Pakistan or globally, it was these writers who actually experienced that culture. That's why those writings become famous. But if you come towards the contemporary works that the new writers are bringing, so it is very much rooted in your social issues. The two of them are sitting in front of you, and if you study their work and you read their work, and you'll find that now the local issues, environment is there, domestic violence is there.
Sonia, your own
a lot of-
dissertation is on Uzma Aslam Khan's
Yes.
writing, which is like Uzma Aslam Khan has not talked about 9/11 or anything
Yes.
global, but I think she is very much
and
interested
when
in
they're talking
indigenous
about
stories.
9/11 because they experienced that, and it was the time when those writers were bringing that Anglophone writing to the world. But now, if you may just take the last 5 years and this year, I think a lot of work is there. And I was just looking at the bookstall, and I was amazed to see a lot of young writers and new writers writing in English languages. And I think we need to read those works and bring that into our syllabus.
Again, as I said earlier, that basically before commenting on what our writers are doing, it's very important that you are informed about what they are writing. Omar Shahid Ahmed, Bilal Tanveer, Uzma Aslam Khan, Sami Shah, Osama Siddiq and Bina Shah. I mean, like, you just read all those writers and you will see that they have nothing to do. They haven't talked about 9/11 stuff. They haven't talked about Islamophobia and war and terror propaganda, but they are specifically concerned with the indigenous problems and indigenous issues. So yeah, again, I emphasize again and again, it's so simple to say, oh, our writers are writing nothing, So yes, the last decade probably was the decade of 9/11 and post 9/11 fiction. That is over now. Our writers are experimenting with newer ideas. They're dealing with multiple issues. Yes, they're writing about indigenous problems. They're writing about global, issues as well. But please don't sort of, pigeonhole them in one single category. Interesting thing is that there is such a wide variety of writing coming up from Pakistani writers that probably you're not even aware of that. We had, yes, there was a time when, partition literature came up, and then post-partition literature and post-independence literature. Then there was a huge body of literature written on Zia's time, and then there was, post-9/11 writing. Now, just look at the ways in which our writers are experimenting with different genres, popular genres, speculative genres. So we have utopian literature, dystopian literature, science fiction, you have fantasy, you have apocalyptic literature, you have post-apocalyptic literature, you have crime fiction, you have genre studies, you have, Gothic studies. Come on.
Even we have eco-Gothic now.
Explore the world of writing that is available out there. You just need to get yourself familiarized with that. I'm sorry, I get very emotional when somebody's just sort of, pigeonhole Pakistani writing. Okay, yes. And then we'll come to you. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Samiha Khalik, and I'm an author of the book which I wrote. Can you hear me? Which I wrote a few years ago. So it's a kind of big hit in Pakistan, but I feel pressure to translate it into English. So how do you see this whole scenario or local authors to translate their book in English language to reach the masses or the international audiences? Thank you.
I don't really know the answer to that. But
Can I answer that instead, please?
I suppose you get in touch with publishers, translators, and now, of course, you have Chat GPT. So you can probably do a translation and then edit that translation.
And another thing is that, we really need to translate these works in order to, make them available for the global audience. That's the most important thing. Why would you not want your writers to be read by the global readers or by international readers? I think this is the very first thing that we really need to pay attention to. Okay, yes, one question from here. And then we'll come to you if we have time. Yes. Okay.
Is this? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so I have been I'm listening to all the questions, and it's can be a comment. I would say, like, all of them are asking like this I would say an obsession with Urdu language, like we are not writing in Urdu. So I would speak as a Pashtun speaker here. Like for us, is in nation or as an ethnicity, Urdu has been kind of a colonizing language, I would say, in a sense. Like, for me, I express myself way better in English rather than Urdu. Like one of the girl was saying, like, I understand hasrat better than unfulfilled feelings. And so I would say that I understand the unfulfilled feelings better than hasrat. So
interesting
I
take,
think
actually.
I think it's not about like
just English, but rather, yes, it's a very interesting
so
point that.
English is giving, as a Pashtun speaker, English is giving me that platform, that medium, where I can express myself and where I can, grow as a scholar.
Yeah. So if it comes to kind of, the languages of the colonial legacy, so it's not just related to the British colonialism, but it is related to the indigenous models of colonialism as well. One last question, yes. Can you just hand over the mic to the guy, and then we'll wind up the session.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I'm asking question from Ma'am Aram that it is a global language and everything is about global identity. But my concern is what is our that is globalized in a whole process. Like we are accepting everything from there. Is it not only one-way traffic from their side and we are accepting it, or we are only the consumer of English language?
No, we definitely are the consumers of English language, but the point is that what I'm making again and again is that we are producing our own works, and I think we are encouraging the works in native language, indigenous languages, and Pakistan has started these efforts, and I think educational institutions are bringing that, and our national policies, for example, higher education system, they are also encouraging people to have researches on your indigenous texts, on your, whether in any language, be it in English language. So I don't think that we are only focusing on English language as a medium of expression. They can be a global language, to ban international language, they have established themselves, right? But we cannot escape from that. But what we need to do is that bring your own idiom into that, add into that, and make your own idiom, make your own language a global language, and so that people can understand that.
Thank you so much, Sonia. So time's up, and I'm afraid we'll have to just wind up our discussion here. I would especially like to thank Razia, Amber, and Sonia for joining me for this exciting session, and special thanks, of course, to our audience as well for giving us time to listen to our talk. Thank you.